The Dog in the Channel by Edward Bristol. Read by Troy W. Hudson. Produced for Wildfish Audio in 2014. Our house in Bangkok stood at the end of a cul-de-sac inside a big compound bordering to an even bigger slum. A barbed wire fenced wall separated us from the poor. I liked the wall for the cozy atmosphere it creates in our street, but the inhabitants of the slum didn't seem to justify the security. Their lives were just as burdensome or as happy as ours, and they didn't care about the crazy foreigners inside the compound. Crime was not a topic, but bad things did happen behind the wall. To control the swamp that Bangkok is built on, the city's engineers dug up channels and concreted over every trickle of running water. Today, the channels and rivers of Bangkok are death traps to all land creatures. The embankments are unforgiving walls, too steep and slippery, even for rats to climb up. Such a channel lay behind our compound's wall, a dark and still body of water, choked with garbage, a sad sight with a bad smell, but normal in Bangkok. During one of the first nights in our new house, I was roused by a wail and splashing sounds. I ran to the upper window from where I could see the channel. A dog had fallen in. I saw him paddling back and forth, searching a way out. Every few seconds, he let out this heart-stabbing wail. Then he tried to climb on one of the garbage islands, but in vain. It sunk away and reemerged in a circle around him. I looked out for the fridge that I had seen floating the other day, but it was gone. Our dogs, joining the terrible wails with their own interpretation, interrupted even my wife's deep sleep. When she came up and saw what happened, she started to cry. I put my arms around her. She was shivering despite the heat. It must have been 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, yet Bangkok was still like a steam sauna. After years in the third world, one sadly gets hardened to suffering. Yet I cannot stand idle when there's at least something that can be tried. The compound's wall was too high to climb. Even if I had a ladder, there was too much barbed wire on top. The dog wailed and paddled on for his little life. I grabbed my sneakers and started to run, first a kilometer or 2 into the opposite direction, away from the wall and the channel, out of our compound and down onto Sukhumvit Road, one of Bangkok's busy 8-lane arteries. There I turned right towards the first big junction. I ran fast, feeling positively athletic in my mission, which I was not. In fact, I carried 20 kilos overweight. Lorries and cars honked at me. A crazy foreigner in pajamas and sneakers racing through the dark? At the big junction, I turned right into a smaller road, which means only 4 lanes in Bangkok, and from there again right into a residential street, consequently making a wide circle around our compound and finally arriving at a bridge, crossing the channel behind the compound. Beside the bridge, I found the little track which I had noticed earlier and which followed up the channel between our compound's wall and the slum. When I got to the back of our house, my wife had climbed into a tree from where she could peer over the wall. The dog was still alive, but in between his wails, there were gurgling sounds. He was clawing the wall, trying to hold on to the slippery moss. I lay on my belly and leaned over the bank. As he saw me, he squeaked and tried to get away. It was a typical mid-sized street mutt, half-wild creatures with no family attachment, shy and wary of humans. I snatched him by the neck and hauled him up, determined to fight for his life even in this misery. He bit me in the wrist. Now I squeaked and let go in midair. Luckily, he was already on an upward trajectory. He crashed against the wall and landed on his feet. For a moment, we stared at each other, me breathlessly non-athletic and him scared out of his senses. Then he dashed off and again fell into the channel. There he was, paddling around and wailing once more. I was rather dispirited, but my wife up in the tree was not. The second time, having learned my lesson, I got him by the tail, pulled him upwards, and swung him to safe ground, always keeping good distance from his jaws. I was afraid his tail might come off, but it held fine. Those street mutts are tough little fellows. The instant I let go of his tail, he disappeared down the path and into the dark. No more splashing sounds. He too had learned his lesson. Probably he felt that he had escaped not only the water, but also Bangkok's legendary dog eater, the nightmare of all street puppies. I was left behind in the mud, bleeding and panting. You can't expect him to say thanks. To my wife, however, I was a hero, and back in the house, I got beer for my wrist and many hugs. The next day, I broke the lock off an emergency exit in the compound's wall. There was, of course, no key, and thus got direct access to the little path next to the channel. Then we bought a big landing net in a fishing shop. We regularly rescued lizards and birds and cats, but mostly dogs, young dogs. They're just too silly. We also built a watchtower for our dog to guard the channel, which you can see in the cover image. Now, when something falls in, he howls, and we get the net ready. The end. Thanks for listening. Please also visit edwardbristol.com.